Joe knows taxes.
Joe knows the market.
Joe knows Social Security.
Joe knows income planning.
Joe knows pickleball? No.
This is Joe Knows Retirement.
On today's episode of Joe Knows Retirement, we will be talking about 4 ways to protect your wealth throughout your retirement. And so when we think about this concept, we always bring up that mountain analogy, and that's ultimately why our name is Peak Retirement Planning, is because we help people get down the mountain, is what we say. So when you think about the mountain, you've gone up the mountain all these years. You've been climbing, you've been saving, and you've been working pretty hard. And in that phase up the mountain, you've been growing, grow, save. It's quite different than what you have to do in retirement. So we often say, what got you here may not get you there when we think about retirement planning. And so when you think about that mountain of going down, your mindset is now protect, right? How do we preserve this nest egg that we've worked hard for? We don't have a long enough time horizon if the market goes down. We now have to take and pay taxes on all these tax-deferred investments we saved all these years. We have to make sure we have an estate plan that if something happens, that our loved ones are going to be taken care of, because now that is getting nearer life expectancy. We're getting closer to life expectancy every year that we wait and don't have a plan there, and bad things can happen if we don't, obviously. And then also healthcare plan is more of a problem now versus ever. You know, the older you get, typically the more you're going to need healthcare. And obviously the costs of that are not inexpensive, and the needs of it are often are going to keep increasing as years go on, is what they're expecting. So in knowing we've got those types of things to deal with retirement, we now have more risks. We have longevity risks, the risk of living too long, right? We've got all of these things, inflation, all of these things playing together that, okay, how do we protect ourselves to these big risks, because we don't have an income coming in anymore to protect ourselves. We now have to create our own income, and we have to do that on a finite amount of resources. We have only so many investments. Our Social Security is probably not going to see any significant increases over the years, right? We're not paying into it anymore. And hey, I don't know about you, but I don't think they're going to be giving a huge cost of living adjustment to keep up with inflation every single year ongoing, knowing that Social Security is underfunded. So enough of us being doomsday here. Let's think about how can we actually plan for this to be better versus talking about how bad it is, right? So the first thing that we want to look at when protecting the wealth in retirement is protect your investments. So we often see that many people are taking on way too much risk when they reach that retirement phase. So we have a lot of people that talk to us, a lot of people from podcasts and YouTube and workshops and webinars. And when we take an analysis in that discovery session for them, typically what we see is they're taking on way too much risk than they need to. Most people are just still invested in stocks and bonds, just traditional stocks and bonds that they've been invested in all these years. And, it's done great over the years. So, you've done your job, you've done well, but remember, what got us here may not get us there. And so we actually had a client last year I'll share the example of, and I share this all the time, and they had $500,000 and they had their statement, and we were looking through it, and they had a 20% loss on that statement. Now, that statement only showed the amount of loss. It didn't show how many dollars they lost. It just showed that percentage loss. And so we asked them, you had $500,000, the market was down 20%, your 60-40 was down about 20%. You lost about $100,000 last year, didn't you? And they said yes. Luckily it came back. But we asked them, how did that make you feel? How did it make you feel knowing you lost $100,000? And they mentioned, we just retired and now we are working part-time because we're afraid if it happens again. Or what if it was low, and what if it kept going down even further? And so these are realities that we have to think about. And you look at 2008, how bad that market crash was, right? So if we retire during that phase, well, we have something called the fragile decade. And it's 5 years before you retire and 5 years after you retire. If the market goes down during that period, you're facing what we're calling a double loss. 1, from the market being down, and 2, from your withdrawal. And so you have to ask yourself, do you have enough time to make up for that loss? Do you have enough time to make up not only 1 loss, but 2 losses over your future there? Because when you're working, you may have the time to make that up. And you also only have one loss while you're working because you're not taking out from your investment. So it's easier to overcome one loss than two losses is ultimately the idea. And at some workshops I do here in the community, I'll take like a tape measure and I'll get 90 inches on it, and I'll ask the audience of, all right, here's a 90-inch tape measure. Let's make this seem like our life expectancy. Where do you currently sit at on this tape measure? And most people sit around age 60 or 62 or 65, and they're not in their 30s anymore. They're not in their 40s anymore. And so you have to ask yourself, where do you sit on that tape measure? And should you be taking on all the risks that you're currently taking? Or is it time to take a step back, start to look for more protection in our investments, and start to preserve some of what we had, some safety, some security, some more predictability? Because now we have to take out income from that retirement. And do we want to trust the stock market to give us that income? Do we want to trust bonds, which were down 15% last year? Do we want to trust that to make sure we're not facing that double loss? So looking to just protect your investments is typically extremely important with people as they reach retirement. That's why a lot of people work with us is to make sure that their investments are protected and making sure they've got a plan, an income plan, as they continue to progress there. So, and the way we think about it right now, think of right now, current state. Interest rates are near highs, not all-time highs, but highs for what we've seen in the past few years, right? And so when you can get that amount of guarantee and you can get, higher interest rate on those protected types of investments, now may be the time to do it, especially knowing that, hey, yes, the market's been volatile, but right now we're right up back where it was. And so, or at least pretty close to where it was. And so you kind of think of it as take your chips off the table. Right? If you look at the market where it was 10 years ago, well, we're much higher than that. Now may be the time to do that. Take what's been one of the highest points it's been, and now let's preserve it, let's protect it, and let's make sure we can protect that principle there so they can actually get us to the finish line there. And we often tell people hey, you may not need more money. You may not need a 20 or 30% return, because if you want to get a 20 to 30% return, what do you have to do? You have to take on more risk. Well, if you don't want to take on risk, and you're not going to get a 20 to 30% return. Everyone knows how that game works. But if you don't need that type of return to get to the destination, why are we doing that? Why are we losing sleep at night knowing that, yeah, we may have 2 million instead of 1 million? Well, you only need 700,000 to live your retirement, and that's being conservative. So why are we worried about getting 2 million? Unless you're going to live a luxurious retirement, which most of our clients are saying, no, we want to buy the blueberries on sale, as I always talk about with my mom, right? My mom loves blueberries and she will not buy them unless they're on sale. Well, she's fine financially for retirement, but that's just how she is. So do you think she wants to take all this risk knowing that's her mindset? Probably not. And so that's something I would challenge you with is think of where you're at and actually do an analysis to see how much money do you need to retire? Is it, 500,000? Is that going to get you to your finish line? Because a lot of times we'll run these numbers for our clients and bare minimum, most of them only need 2 or 3% to actually get to the finish line. And so they don't need 20% returns to get to the finish line. They just need slow and steady, consistent returns over time to get them what they need. And so when we can show them a plan, that's likely to get better than that, they're feeling good, especially knowing that their income is going to be covered for what they need it for. So just some encouragement there to just make sure you're taking a harder look at your investments there. And, now may be the time to protect it more. And again, if you're a very aggressive investor and you want to seek as much growth as possible and you want to build the biggest barn possible, maybe don't listen to that thought I just made, So it's all dependent on your goals and what you're trying to achieve, right? For me, I'm not near retirement. I've got many more years to work. I love what I do and I don't think I'll stop anytime soon. And if that's the case, well, I'm going to seek growth in my investments. I'm not necessarily worried about protection. But again, remember where I sit on the tape measure is different where than you sit. So that's what you have to consider. Okay, let's talk about the next way to protect your wealth in retirement. And this is my personal favorite. Obviously, I wrote the book, I Hate Taxes. And this is the tax plan and just making sure we are giving the least amount possible to Uncle Sam. So I've got a pretty strong opinion on taxes. I'll be very clear. I'll pay my fair share. I'm not going to go to jail. I'm not going to do what's not right for our country. I'm a proud American. I love this country. I love our military. I love the roads I drive on. I love the libraries I go to. So, that's not the problem. But the problem in my mind is I just don't think the government is the best steward of our tax-paying dollars. And the reason I think that is because, well, I've kind of got the facts to back that up. I mean, our country is in over $30 trillion of debt. And I always joke with people, but if you actually write that number down, that's 3 with a bunch of zeros after it. 3 followed by, I believe it's 13 zeros. I'd have to write it out to make sure I'm right. But that is a big number. And how do we get to that point and having that much debt? Well, it's from overspending, right? Regardless of who's in office, everyone's in the red. And so if that's going to be the case, we're going to end up with a debt crisis. And what are we going to have to do to pay off that debt crisis if we're not going to reduce spending? Well, we couldn't increase inflation, which in my mind is a hidden tax, or we could just raise taxes in general. So those are all things, or stealth taxes. I've talked about stealth taxes before. If you've heard me talk, or you've been following this channel or following who we are. Stealth tax is simply when they make changes to the tax code that you don't necessarily see. For example, not increasing Social Security, the cost of living, for example, let's just make it that one. Or by making Social Security taxable, right? They're not increasing the federal tax rates, but they're finding other ways to get revenue is ultimately the idea. So we just have to be aware of all those things. And some people are like, well, tax rates, yeah, they're going up in 2026, but that's not that big of a deal. It's like, well, I'm worried about that because that is a big deal. It's actually 20%. You're going to have to pay about 20% more in taxes at that time when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires and tax rates go back to what they were in 2017. But I'm worried about all these other areas where they're going to continue to tax us. Remember, back when the tax code started in 1913, the marginal tax rate was like 7% on, I think that was like the highest bracket. And so before 1913, there wasn't even taxes. So why are we having a need to just do all this taxing, right? And so you can just tell that they're just taxing you in every way possible, and that's the way they get the revenue to spend how they want. And so at the end of the day, like I said, I don't mind paying my fair share, but I don't want to pay a penny more. And I just don't fully believe the government's spending my tax-paying dollars in the most fruitful way. Don't get me wrong, there's some great things they spend my money on, but I work hard for my money, and so do you, I'm sure. And I'm sure you want to make sure it's protected, and you're having more in that in your pocket so you can spend it on your values and what your goals are to make a difference in this world. So that's my personal conviction of why I wrote that book, I Hate Taxes, is just to show people, hey, here's how we can lower our taxes, and here's how we can actually own our retirement to have our plan versus Uncle Sam's plan. And Uncle Sam's plan is simply, how do we, Uncle Sam's plan would be, hey, I don't want to listen to anything about tax planning. I don't want to take any action. I don't want to be proactive. I'm just going to do whatever the government tells me to do. So when I turn 73 and the government forces me to take out money, that's a required minimum distribution. Now they're going to force me to take it out and I don't have an option. And it's at unknown tax rates, so they could make it the tax rate whatever they wanted. I just don't like that concept. I don't think that is a smart thing to do. With the ideas I just mentioned with our current debt crisis and tax rates going up. But you can make that guess, for yourself of what you want to do there ultimately. So what we're doing with a lot of our clients is how do we implement tax planning strategies to save money on taxes over time? And so we have over 50 tax planning strategies that we go through with our clients every single year. And we feel that we can save people $100,000 or more in tax planning, for most of the people that we work with. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into that, and there's a lot of different strategies, and it's just going to depend on your situation and what works best. But we have a tax calculator. We're able to show our clients, like, here's how much you'll save by doing this strategy versus this strategy based on what we expect. And so those can be very, very valuable over time. So ultimately ask you, what would you do with an extra $100,000 in your pocket that doesn't go to Uncle Sam? May feel a little more protection, a little more secure, may be able to go on that trip, maybe able to spend more time with the grandkids, and may feel a little better about that retirement is the peace of mind we hope to give our clients there. So hopefully that can be a valuable way to protect your wealth there, is just having a tax plan, being aware of what the tax code says and planning accordingly, and being what I call tax smart, okay? Just knowing what the rules are. So the next way to protect your wealth is what we call the estate plan. And for the estate plan, this is the one that everyone wants and needs, but does everyone have it? Not quite. There's a stat out there, if you look it up online, 70% of people die without an estate plan in place. And so you're probably wondering, well, who needs an estate plan? Do I need an estate plan? I don't have an estate plan. Well, everyone should have an estate plan, in my opinion, who's over age 18. Now, that doesn't mean you need a complete estate plan with everything and all the bells and whistles, but we need some basic documents in place, like a healthcare power of attorney, a financial power of attorney. Who's going to make those decisions for you if you can no longer make them? A will. Where's your money going, right? All of these things are extremely important if you pass away for your loved ones to make sure that everything is easy. If you've had a loved one pass away, you know the severity of having your estate planning documents in place. And it's not fun if you have to go through probate. It's very costly. It's very expensive. And so you want to have everything organized. You want to have beneficiaries in place because that's one way to make sure you have some more protection when you pass away. So if you've been a diligent saver, this is always something that we emphasize with our clients. Most of the people we work with are diligent savers. And so, they've accumulated some assets. And if you want to protect those assets to go to your spouse or to go to your kids or go to your charity, you've got to do some planning. If you just let things go, well, your money can only do a few things, as I always joke around. It can go to your kids' charities, go to your spouse, it can go to taxes, it can go to nursing home, but that's about it. Where else is it going to go, right? Or if you can spend it, I guess is another way. And so, at the end of the day, you got to choose what you're going to do. And I'll share a funny story with you. I heard this. I forget who told me this story. I think it was another advisor, but he was working with a client, and they didn't want to do anything with their money. They're just like, I don't know what to do with my money. I don't want to spend it. I'm frugal. I don't want to give it to my kids because they're just going to spend it. I hate the government. I don't want them to get anything. And so he looked at him and said, well, you better pick the pisser because only one of them is going to happen. And it's up to you to decide what that's going to be, right? Someone's going to spend this money. It can be you. It can be the kid. It can be the government if you just do no tax planning. It could be, a charity could take it. So at the end of the day, if you don't care where it goes and you're afraid wherever it goes, you got to decide something. You got to make a decision. So funny story, but it's a very much a reality because a lot of people haven't really thought about what they're going to do with their wealth. They accumulate all this money, they play the game, and then they realize I can't even spend this much even if I wanted to. And so you really have got to think about what am I going to do with that wealth I've accumulated. There's a good book out there if you're really looking for guidance on this. I'll give you two books actually, and both are very different perspectives. One book is called Splitting Heirs, and that's really a Christian worldview at the idea of what should we do with the money when we pass away. And so in this book, it basically just tries to brainstorm with you and just give you some ideas. And at the end of the day, it's your money. You need to do what you want to do with it. Don't let someone encourage you to do something you don't want to do. But it talks about, hey, maybe if we leave it to the kids, that could be a great thing, but also maybe it ruins their life because we're giving them too much money. So that's really, big consideration to think about. Your kids may be really good at managing money, but what are they going to do when $1 million or $2 million is sitting in their lap? So we've got to consider that. And then it also encourages, hey, maybe we give to charities. Maybe charities is the best place to give it. What are the negatives of giving a charity too much money, right? If the charity can't handle it and they're not expecting it or they're not used to having that much money, well, maybe it doesn't, get to use it wisely. So just finding ways of, hey, maybe we, look at that a little differently. So that book's a good one, but also like if you just want to go the extreme opposite and say, I don't want to leave my money to anyone, I want to spend it. Well, then there's a book called Die with Zero that I'd recommend you read. And in this book, it talks about how do you literally die with nothing saved. So we always get the joke of, I want to die with nothing in my bank account, right? I want the last check to bounce back. Well, if that's you, then this book is probably worth reading and may encourage you of, hey, maybe we need to live a little to enjoy what we've saved all these years. And that's something we try to encourage a lot of our clients to do because it's like, you don't have any desires to give to your kids. You have small charity desires. Like let's enjoy this. Let's see you live these out. Next time you come and see us, let's see some pictures of all the trips and all the fun times with the grandkids. So I think that's extremely important to do. So that's the main thing with the estate plan, just really deciding what you want to do there. But if you have a lot of wealth, if you don't plan the right way, then you can see some bad things happen to your wealth. For example, we already talked about the taxes, right? Already talked about the investments if they go down. And the next one we're going to talk about is the healthcare plan. And that's a big one, as we talked about with a nursing home. And if you have a nurse come home and take care of you, specifically if you need long-term care, the cost for that's about $50,000 to $100,000 a year, depending on where you live and just, type of amount of coverage you need. And so we want to encourage you to have a plan of what would happen if that were the case. And long-term care, healthcare in general, long-term care, but also healthcare in general, it's probably one of the most expensive things in your retirement outside of taxes, in my opinion. And with healthcare, there's a study by Fidelity that if an individual, if they're 65, over their lifetime, they'll pay about $150,000 in healthcare costs. And that's per individual. So if you're married, it could be $300,000. And that's outside of long-term care, those numbers I just quoted you earlier. And so if that's the case, where are you going to come up with that money, and where are you going to make sure you mitigate that risk within your plan? So, making sure you've got the right amount of Medicare coverage, the right supplemental Medicare coverage, making sure you've got, you could look at doing a trust to try to do some Medicaid planning. That's something that's not for everyone, but could be, right for the right people. We have clients that do that type of planning, and we can help them, structure and look at ways to do so. We work with an attorney that meets with our clients at our office, and that's one of his specialties is elder law, and making sure that we can plan to try to protect against any Medicaid situations where the government starts to come after our assets. So something to consider there. Long-term care insurance is really expensive. To be frank with you, it's something that could be worth looking into. I don't want to turn people off on that, but I will be pretty frank with you and transparent that like most of our clients recently are not looking at that. If you would have asked me about 5 years ago about long-term care, I would have told you it was probably worth getting because the need is so big and the cost of it was not as significant as it is now. So just something to consider there. And then so there's many other ways to plan for healthcare plan. So just making sure you find a way to plan for it and try to find ways to protect it, because again, we're all going to need healthcare costs at some point. I think everyone would agree with that. It's just going to, a matter of how much. And so we need to plan against that in case it's, severe. So those are 4 ways to protect your wealth in retirement. Hope it was helpful for you. Hope there's some things that, I can encourage you to start planning on today. And we will catch you on the next episode of Joe Knows Retirement. Have a great day.
Since we do not know your specific situation, none of this information can serve as tax, legal, insurance, or financial advice and may be outdated or inaccurate. The information comes from sources believed to be reliable but cannot be guaranteed. This content is prepared for educational purposes only. If you need advice, please contact a qualified CPA, attorney, insurance agent, financial advisor, or the appropriate professional for the subject you would like help with. Peak Retirement Planning, Inc. is an Ohio-based registered investment advisor and able to offer advisory services in Ohio and in other states where registered or exempt from registration.